The wind has a voice in the high plains of Montana, and on that night it screamed. It screamed of loss and desperation, clawing at the walls of a lonely cabin where a woman named Elara tried to forget the sound of her own silence. She was a ghost in her own home, haunted by an empty cradle. But as the storm reached its zenith, a different sound pierced the gale, a frantic, desperate pounding on her door. Outside stood a man, his face a mask of anguish, clutching a tiny, wailing bundle. He wasn't a bandit or a drifter. He was a father, and he had come begging. His plea was simple: impossible milk for his dying child. What he didn't know was that in asking for life, he was about to resurrect a past. Both of them had thought long buried. The world outside Elara's cabin was a maelstrom of dust and fury. The Montana sky, usually a vast canvas of sapphire blue, was a bruised, churning grey. Wind howled through the sparse pines surrounding her homestead, a mournful sound that echoed the perpetual ache in her heart. It was the kind of storm that drove beasts to shelter and men to their whiskey. For Elara, it was just another night alone. Her small cabin was impeccably clean, a testament to a woman with too much time and too few people to fill it. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. On a small, lovingly carved table sat a single place setting. She hadn't had a visitor in months. Beside the hearth, cloaked in shadow, stood a small wooden cradle. It was empty. It had been empty for 6 agonizing months, ever since her own little boy, Samuel, had been taken by the fever before he'd even learned to laugh. Elara's life had shrunk to the size of this cabin, her world defined by the perimeter of her modest land and the boundaries of her grief. She milked her lone cow, tended her small garden, and mended clothes she would never wear into town. The town Blackwater Ridge was a day's ride away, and she had no reason to go. The pitying looks of the townsfolk were harder to bear than the solitude. Suddenly, a sound sharp and violent cut through the storm's lament. Bam, bam, bam! It was a fist on her door, heavy and frantic. Elara froze her hand, hovering over the mending in her lap. No one came out this far, not in a storm like this. Her first thought was of outlaws' men driven by the gale to seek shelter and plunder. Her late husband, Daniel, had left a shotgun over the mantelpiece. Her eyes darted towards it. "Please, is anyone in there? Please, I need help." The voice was not a threat. It was a plea, ragged and broken. A man's voice, stripped of all pride. It was the sound of utter desperation. Hesitantly, Elara rose. She moved to the door, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She peered through a small crack in the shuttered window beside it. In the swirling dust and rain, she could make out the shape of a man. He was tall and broad-shouldered, but he was slumped, beaten down by more than just the weather. His hat was gone, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. But it was what he held that made her breath catch in her throat. He was cradling a small bundle of blankets against his chest, trying to shield it from the wind's assault. From within the bundle came a cry, a thin, reedy wail that was almost lost in the storm. It was the cry of a newborn. Elara's hand flew to her own chest, a phantom ache blooming where her own baby used to rest. The sound was a knife to her soul. She fumbled with the heavy bolt, her fingers clumsy. The door swung inward, with a groan pulled by the vacuum of the storm. The man stumbled across the threshold, bringing the tempest in with him. He was soaked through his face, etched with exhaustion, and a grief so profound it seemed ancient. His eyes a startling clear blue, were wild with panic. He looked at Elara, a stranger, as if she were his last and only hope in the world. "Ma'am," he gasped, his voice raspy. "I'm sorry. I saw your light. My horse, it gave out a mile back." He swayed on his feet, and Elara reached out to steady him. "What is it?" "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice softer than she'd intended. The man's gaze dropped to the bundle in his arms. His lip trembled. My wife. She passed, giving birth. 2 days ago." He choked on the words. "This is our daughter. I've been trying to get her to my sister's place over the ridge. But the storm, she hasn't eaten. She won't take sugar water. She's fading, ma'am." He finally looked Elara in the eye, and all the pride of a hardened rancher crumbled into dust. "I know this is a forward and unholy thing to ask of a stranger," he whispered, his voice cracking. "But I saw you had a milk cow in the lean-to. I was wondering, begging, if you might have some milk for my child." Elara's world tilted on its axis. Milk for a baby. It was a cruel cosmic joke. After Samuel had passed, her own body had continued its maternal duty, a painful physical reminder of her loss. The milk she'd had in abundance, the milk her son never got to drink, had only recently dried up. But her cow Bessie was a different story. She stared at the wailing infant, its tiny red face screwed up in misery. Her own arms felt hollow. Her breasts ached with a memory. The empty cradle in the corner seemed to loom larger, a silent accuser. For a moment, a wave of bitter resentment washed over her. Why should this man's child live when hers had died? The thought was ugly, and she pushed it away with shame. This wasn't the man's fault. It wasn't the baby's fault. It was the cruel hand of fate, a hand she knew all too well. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. "Jedediah Stone," he answered, his shoulders sagging with the weight of his name. "Folks call me Jed." "And the baby Lily," he breathed. "My wife." "Sarah." She wanted to name her Lily. Elara looked from the desperate father to the starving child. In that moment, something shifted within her. The grief that had frozen her heart for 6 months began to thaw, replaced by a fierce primal instinct she thought had died with her son. This tiny, helpless creature knew nothing of fate or fairness. She only knew hunger. "Give her to me." Elara said, her voice finding a strength she didn't know it still possessed. She held out her arms. Jedediah Stone looked at her, his blue eyes swimming with a mixture of disbelief and overwhelming gratitude. He hesitated for only a second before carefully, reverently placing the blanket-wrapped bundle into Elara's waiting arms. The moment the baby settled against her, a shock went through Elara. The weight, the warmth, the faint scent of new life. It was all so painfully familiar. Lily's cries softened to a weak whimper, as if she sensed a change. Elara pulled back the blanket. The baby was so small her skin mottled from the cold, her tiny mouth opening and closing like a little bird. "I have fresh milk from this morning's milking," Elara said, turning away so Jedediah couldn't see the tears welling in her eyes. "Get yourself by the fire and get warm. Your daughter will be fine." As Jedediah stumbled towards the hearth, shedding his wet coat, Elara carried Lily towards the kitchen area. She didn't have a bottle, but she had a clean cloth and a small cup. She would feed this child drop by precious drop if she had to. As she did, she felt a profound and unsettling shift in the universe. By opening her door to this stranger and his child, she felt she hadn't just let in the storm, but the whole chaotic, unpredictable world she had tried so hard to shut out. She had no idea how right she was. The cabin, once a tomb of silence, was now filled with the small sounds of life. The crackle of the fire, the soft murmurings of Elara as she patiently fed the baby, and the ragged, exhausted breathing of Jedediah Stone, who had slumped into the chair by the hearth. He watched her with an intensity that was almost unnerving, his gratitude a palpable force in the room. Elara worked with a practiced, gentle efficiency that belied her long months of mourning. She warmed the milk just enough, testing it on her wrist. She soaked the corner of a clean linen cloth and gently squeezed the life-giving drops into Lily's eager mouth. The baby, weak but possessed of a powerful will to live, suckled greedily. It was a slow, painstaking process, but with every swallow a little more color seemed to return to Lily's cheeks. Elara's focus was entirely on the child. The motions were automatic, stored in a part of her soul she had tried to lock away. Rocking gently, humming a tune without realizing it, shushing and cooing. It was as if no time had passed at all, as if Samuel were back in her arms. The thought was a double-edged sword, bringing both comfort and a fresh, sharp stab of pain. She could feel Jedediah's eyes on her and knew he was seeing not just a woman saving his daughter, but a mother. After what felt like an hour, Lily was satiated. Her tiny stomach was full, her cries had ceased, and her eyes had drifted shut. She was sound asleep, nestled in the crook of Elara's arm, a picture of pure, innocent peace. "Thank you, Jedediah," said his voice, thick with emotion. "Ma'am, I don't have the words. You saved her life. I'll owe you a debt for the rest of my days." "A child needs to eat, Mr. Stone." "It's no debt," Elara replied softly, her gaze still fixed on Lily's face. "You should get some rest. You can take my bed. I'll watch her. I couldn't possibly. You're no good to her." Exhausted. Elara interrupted her tone, leaving no room for argument. The storm won't break before morning. Sleep. Defeated by his exhaustion and her quiet authority, Jedediah nodded. He retrieved a dry blanket she offered, and retreated to the small alcove where her bed was. Within minutes, the sound of his deep, steady breathing joined the cabin's chorus. Elara was alone with the baby. She walked over to the hearth and sank into the rocking chair. Her rocking chair, the one she hadn't been able to sit in since Samuel's passing. With Lily in her arms, it felt right again. She looked down at the sleeping infant, a tiny miracle who had appeared out of the storm. A wave of love, fierce and protective, washed over her, and it terrified her. This wasn't her child. She couldn't let herself feel this. As she adjusted the blankets around Lily, her fingers brushed against something hard and cool beneath the swaddling. Curious, she gently worked the object free. It was a small chain, tarnished and delicate. Lying in her palm was a silver locket, oval-shaped, and etched with the image of a single defiant wildflower, a black-eyed Susan. Elara's blood ran cold. Her breath hitched. Her hand began to tremble so violently, she was afraid she would wake the baby. It couldn't be. It was a coincidence. There must be thousands of lockets like this in the world. But this one had the same tiny, almost imperceptible scratch near the clasp, a scratch she herself had made as a child, trying to pry it open with a pin. With shaking fingers, she worked the tiny, stubborn clasp. It sprang open. Inside there were two miniature portraits, On one side was a faded sepia-toned image of a stern-faced man and a weary-looking woman, her own parents, Thomas and Mary Miller. On the other side was a picture of two little girls, no older than 5 or 6, with identical wide eyes and mischievous grins. One was herself. The other was her older sister, Sarah. A strangled sob escaped Alara's lips. She clapped a hand over her mouth to stifle the sound. The locket had been her mother's, and her mother had given it to Sarah on the day their world fell apart, the day they were separated. She was 10 years old. Her family had been farmers with a prosperous plot of land just east of Blackwater Ridge. But a powerful man, a land baron with a charming smile and a heart of poison, had wanted their land. His name was Marcus Blackwood. He had used fraudulent claims and legal trickery, backed by the intimidation of hired guns to ruin them. Her father, a proud and stubborn man, had fought back. It cost him everything. One night, riders came. The barn was set ablaze. In the chaos and terror, her father had given the locket to Sarah and told her to run to take it to their aunt in the next county. He'd told Alara to hide in the root cellar. She never saw her father or sister again. Her mother died of a broken heart a year later. Alara had been passed to distant relatives who treated her as little more than a servant, a past she had fled as soon as she was old enough, eventually meeting and marrying Daniel, who brought her here to this isolated homestead to start a new, quiet life. She had assumed her sister was dead, lost to the harsh realities of the frontier. And now, 20 years later, here was the proof. In her hands, around the neck of a baby named Lily, whose mother's name was Sarah. Jedediah had said his wife's name was Sarah. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Jedediah Stone was her brother-in-law. This child, this tiny infant, sleeping in her arms, was her niece. Her own blood. She looked from the locket to the sleeping man by the fire. Jedediah Stone. Was he part of it? Did he know who she was? Did he know the history of this locket and the fire and the ruin that Marcus Blackwood had brought upon her family? Her mind reeled. The man whose child she had just saved from starvation might be connected to the deepest, most painful wound of her life. The storm outside raged on, but it was nothing compared to the tempest that had just been unleashed inside Alara's heart. The past wasn't buried. It was here in her cabin, sleeping by her fire, and she was holding its most innocent, vulnerable part in her arms. The first rays of dawn crept through the shuttered window, painting dusty stripes of light across the cabin floor. The storm had broken, leaving behind a world washed clean and deceptively peaceful. Alara hadn't slept. She had sat in the rocking chair all night, watching Lily breathe the silver locket clutched tight in her hand. Her mind was a whirlwind of grief, anger, and 1,000 unanswered questions. Jedediah stirred as the light hit his face. He sat up with a groan, his body stiff from sleeping in the chair. For a moment, confusion clouded his features. Then memory returned. His eyes shot towards Alara. A look of profound relief washed over him when he saw Lily still sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, his voice rough with sleep. She slept through the night. Like an angel, Alara replied, her voice strained. She couldn't meet his eyes. "Mr. Stone, we need to talk." Her tone, cool and deliberate, made him pause. He got to his feet, stretching his back, his brow furrowed with concern. "Is everything all right?" Alara took a deep breath. There was no gentle way to do this. She held up her hand, opening her palm to reveal the locket. I found this around Lily's neck. My husband said his wife's name was Sarah. I need you to tell me her family name, her maiden name. Jedediah stared at the locket, his expression shifting from confusion to stunned recognition. That was Sarah's. It was her most prized possession. She never took it off. Her family. Her maiden name was Miller. Sarah Miller. The name hung in the air between them, heavy and resonant. Elara finally looked up, her eyes boring into his. My name is Elara Miller. Jedediah's jaw went slack. He looked from her face to the locket and back again, the pieces slowly, impossibly fitting together in his mind. Miller. But Sarah told me her family. She thought they were all gone. A fire. She said she had a younger sister, Elara, but she believed she'd perished. I was told she was gone too. Elara said, her voice trembling with the weight of 20 lost years. I was hidden in the root cellar. When I came out, everything was ash and silence. They were all gone. My father, my mother. Sarah. The two strangers stared at each other, the chasm of 2 decades, suddenly bridged by a shared tragedy. He wasn't an enemy. He was family. He was the man her long-lost sister had loved. The realization was staggering, overwhelming. My God, Jedediah whispered, sinking back into his chair. All these years. She talked about you. She wondered what you would have looked like if you'd have been happy. She never gave up hope, not really. Tears welled in his eyes, not of grief for his wife, but of wonder for this impossible reunion. She married you, Elara stated more to herself than to him. She found a life, a good one. Jedediah said, his voice thick. We had a ranch a few miles south of here. It was good. Until his voice trailed off. The fever came on her right after Lily was born. It was too fast. The doctor couldn't do anything. A heavy silence fell between them, filled with the ghosts of what might have been. A sister she never got to know as a woman. A brother-in-law she'd never met. A niece who would never know her own mother. Then a darker thought intruded on Elara's grief. The fire. The reason for their separation. Jedediah, she said, her voice hardening. The man who took our family's land. The man who set that fire. Do you know his name? Jedediah's face darkened, the brief moment of wonder replaced by a familiar, weary anger. I know it. The whole valley knows it. His name is Marcus Blackwood. Elara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. He's still here, in Blackwater Ridge? Here. Jedediah gave a bitter laugh. Ma'am. Sister. He owns Blackwater Ridge. The bank, the saloon, the general store. He's the justice of the peace. He bought up nearly every parcel of land in this valley mine, and Sarah's included. Squeezed folks out with debt threats and prices no one could refuse. The full horrifying picture began to form. The man who had destroyed her childhood had become a king ruling over the very lands he had stolen. Sarah and I. Jedediah continued, his voice low and intense. We had the one piece of land he couldn't get his hands on. The Stone Ranch. It's been in my family for 3 generations, the deed ironclad. Blackwood hated it. He saw it as a loose thread in his perfect tapestry. He leaned forward, his blue eyes glinting with a dangerous fire. For the last year, he's been trying to force me out, claiming my deed is invalid, that he holds a superior title. From an old railroad grunt. It's a lie, but he has the law in his pocket. He's been strangling my business, getting the cattle buyers to low-ball my prices, threatening my ranch hands until they quit. Sarah. She worried about it constantly. She said he had the devil's own eyes. Suddenly, Jedediah's desperation the night before made perfect, terrible sense. It wasn't just about getting his daughter to safety. It was about escaping the tightening noose of Marcus Blackwood. He doesn't know who you are, does he? Jedediah asked, his mind racing. He thinks the last of the Millers, the last witness to his first great crime, is dead. He has to, Elara whispered. I've lived out here for 5 years. No one knows my family name. I've been Elara Thorne, my husband's name, and now just Elara the widow. At that moment, Lily stirred in her arms, letting out a soft whimper. Elara looked down at her niece. This wasn't just about a past tragedy anymore. This was about the future. It was about this child. Blackwood hadn't just taken Elara's family. He was now threatening to take what was left of Sarah's. He wanted Jedediah's ranch, Lily's birthright. The grieving widow who hid from the world was gone. In her place was an aunt, a sister, a Miller, and a fire long dormant was rekindled in her soul. It was no longer a fire of grief, but of cold, hard rage. He won't take your ranch, Jedediah. Elara said, her voice low and steady, a promise forged in iron. He won't take anything else from this family. This time someone is going to fight back. Jedediah looked at this woman. He'd only just met this ghost from his wife's past, and for the first time since Sarah's death, he felt a flicker of something he had thought was lost forever hope. Returning to Blackwater Ridge was like stepping into a different world. After years of self-imposed exile, the town felt both alien and painfully familiar to Elara. Jedediah had secured a room for them, above the general store, a small, clean space that felt suffocating after the openness of her cabin. They had agreed she and Lily would be safer in the relative anonymity of the town, while Jedediah returned to his ranch to assess the situation. Word of a stranger in town traveled fast. Elara, veiled and quiet, attracted stares as she purchased supplies. She introduced herself simply as Mrs. Evans, a distant cousin of Jedediah Stone, come to help with the baby. It was a flimsy cover, but the best they could devise. The presence of Marcus Blackwood was everywhere. His name was on the sign of the Blackwood Bank and Trust, on the swinging doors of the opulent Black Diamond Saloon. Elara saw him once from her window. He was a tall, impeccably dressed man in his late 50s with silver hair and a politician's smile. He moved through the town with an air of absolute ownership, nodding to shopkeepers and tipping his hat to ladies, the very picture of a benevolent patriarch. But Elara saw the coldness in his eyes, the predatory stillness beneath the charm. It was the same look she remembered from 20 years ago, the look of a wolf assessing his flock. The pressure on Jedediah began almost immediately. On his second day back at the ranch, 2 of Blackwood's men, rough-looking characters named Pike and Doland, paid him a visit. They didn't draw their guns. They didn't need to. Just making sure you're settling back in Stone Pike, had said, leaning against the porch rail with a leering grin. Mr. Blackwood was so sorry to hear about your wife. He knows how hard it must be running a ranch all alone, with a newborn no less. He'd be willing to take this troublesome property off your hands. For a fair price, of course, to ease your burden. Jedediah had sent them packing, his hand resting on the colt at his hip. But the message was clear. Blackwood knew he was vulnerable. A few days later, the town's sheriff, a man named Brody with a weary face and a star that seemed too heavy for his chest, paid Elara a visit. He was polite, but his eyes were searching. "Ma'am," he began, twisting his hat in his hands. "Mr. Stone is a good man, but he's getting himself into deep water. Mr. Blackwood has filed a formal legal challenge to his deed. Says he has a cartographer coming from Helena to prove his claim. And you believe him?" Elara asked, her voice sharp. Sheriff Brody sighed, a sound of profound helplessness. "What I believe don't much matter, ma'am. Marcus Blackwood holds the mortgage on half the businesses in this town, including the one that pays my salary. He has lawyers. Jedediah has... well, he has his pride. I'm just advising you as a friend to convince him to take Blackwood's offer. It's better than getting nothing." Elara's heart sank. The law, the one thing that should have been their shield, was just another weapon in Blackwood's arsenal. Sheriff Brody wasn't a corrupt man, but he was a captured one. That night, Jedediah rode into town, his face grim. "He's damned the creek," he said, his voice raw with fury. "Blackwood's men built a crude dam upstream. My north pasture is drying up. My cattle won't have water in a week. It's my water from my land, but the dam is on the edge of his property. Brody says it's a civil matter." This was how Blackwood worked. Not with a single killing blow, but with 1,000 cuts. He was strangling them slowly and legally. Elara looked at Jedediah's defeated face, then at Lily, sleeping in the makeshift crib in the corner. The fear and helplessness she had felt for years began to curdle into a hard, cold resolve. She would not be that 10-year-old girl hiding in a cellar ever again. "He thinks we have nothing." "Jedediah," she said, her voice low and intense. "He thinks all he has to fight is your pride and a piece of paper. He's wrong. He's fighting a memory, and memories can be powerful things." Jedediah looked at her confused. "What are you talking about?" "My father." Elara explained, her mind racing back through the fog of time. "He was a fighter, just like you. But he was also a meticulous man. He didn't trust banks, especially not a bank run by a man like Blackwood. He kept everything important at home. Deeds, records, letters. He was so proud of our land. He wouldn't have just let it go. He would have had proof of Blackwood's fraud. But it all burned, Elara. You said so yourself." "The house burned," she corrected him. "The barn burned. But my father was clever. He was always worried about fire or theft. He used to talk about a last line of defense. He built a hidden compartment, a strongbox somewhere on the property. He showed it to me once, made me promise to never speak of it. I was just a child. I'd forgotten all about it. Until now." Hope, fragile but fierce, dawned on Jedediah's face. "You think it's still there? After all this time, the house is gone, but the foundation remains. The root cellar where I hid. It was stone-lined. The fire wouldn't have touched it," Elara said, pacing the small room. "He built the strongbox into the wall of the cellar behind a loose stone. I remember him tapping on it, telling me no one will ever find this." "What could be in it?" Jedediah breathed. "I don't know for sure," Elara admitted, "but my father was in a dispute with Blackwood over water rights and property lines for a year before the fire. He said Blackwood was using forged documents. Maybe. just maybe. My father found proof. The original deeds letters from the land office. Maybe even something more. She paused, the biggest, wildest hope taking root. What if he had something on Blackwood himself? Something that could ruin him. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble based on the faded memory of a child, but it was the only card they had left to play. "It's dangerous," Jedediah said, his protective instincts warring with his desperation. "Your old homestead is on land. Blackwood now owns. If his men see us snooping around—" "Then we go at night," Elara countered, her decision made. "We can't fight him in his town with his laws and his sheriff. We have to find a weapon from the past to save our future. We have to go back to the beginning. We have to go home." The air in the room was thick with tension. The gathering storm was no longer just a metaphor. It was a promise of the confrontation to come. They were no longer just defending a ranch. They were seeking justice for a crime 20 years old, and the key, they prayed, lay buried in the ashes of the past. The journey to the old Miller homestead was made under the cloak of a moonless night. Jedediah and Elara rode in silence, the only sounds the creak of saddle leather and the soft thud of their horses' hooves on the dirt trail. Lily was safely with Clara May, the kind elderly wife of the general store owner who had taken a shine to the baby and asked no questions. The land grew wilder as they left Blackwater Ridge, behind the neat fences of Blackwood's empire, giving way to overgrown chaparral and skeletal pines. After 2 hours of riding, Elara held up a hand. "We're close. We should go the rest of the way on foot." They tethered their horses in a dense copse of trees and proceeded cautiously. The air grew heavy with memory for Elara. Every rock, every gnarled tree was a landmark from her childhood. Finally, they crested a small rise, and she saw it. The homestead was a skeleton, a collection of ghosts in the faint starlight. The proud 2-story house was gone, reduced to a blackened stone foundation, choked with weeds and wildflowers. The great oak tree where she and Sarah had played was still there, its branches twisted and scarred, a silent witness to the tragedy. A wave of grief so powerful it almost buckled her knees washed over Elara. "It was here," she whispered, her voice thick. "Our home." Jedediah placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of silent understanding. "We don't have much time, Elara." "Where's the cellar?" "Shaking off the ghosts." Elara led him to the rear of the foundation. A pair of heavy, slanted wooden doors, warped and grey with age, lay half buried in the earth. They were swollen shut. It took their combined strength, straining and grunting in the silence of the night, to wrench one of the doors open with a groan of rotting wood. A wave of cool, musty air washed over them, the smell of damp earth and time itself. Jedediah lit the lantern he carried, casting a flickering golden light down a set of steep stone steps. "Stay up here and keep watch," he said. "I'll go." "No," Elara said, her voice firm. "I have to do this. I'm the only one who knows where to look." Holding the lantern high, she descended into the darkness, Jedediah close behind her. The cellar was just as she remembered, small and square, the stone walls sweating with moisture. Empty shelves lined one wall, cobwebs hanging from them like funeral shrouds. It was here she had huddled, listening to the roar of the fire and the shouts of the men who had destroyed her world. "The north wall," she murmured, moving the lantern along the stones. He said to count 7 stones from the east corner. She ran her hand along the cold, damp rock, counting under her breath. On the 7th stone, she stopped. It looked identical to the others, set flush and sealed with mortar. Her heart sank. Had her memory failed her? Was this a fool's errand? "It should be here," she whispered, frustrated. "Let me see," Jedediah said, taking the lantern. He examined the stone closely. The mortar is different here. Darker. Newer, maybe. He took out his Bowie knife, wedging the tip into the thin crack around the stone. He pried gently. Nothing. He applied more pressure. The knife tip snapped. "Damn it," he swore softly. Elara's eyes scanned the cellar floor. Her gaze fell on an old rusted iron pry bar, likely left by her father decades ago. "Try this." Jedediah took the bar, wedged the flattened end into the crack, and put his shoulder into it. He strained the muscles in his back cording. There was a grating, scraping sound, and then with a sharp crack, the stone broke free from the ancient mortar. It tumbled to the floor with a heavy thud. Behind it was a dark, square cavity, and nestled inside was a metal strongbox, rusted but intact. A breathless moment passed between them. It was real. They had found it. Jedediah reached in and lifted the box out. It was heavy. "It's locked, of course." "Stand back," Elara said. She took the pry bar. Remembering her father showing her the box's one weakness, she ignored the lock and slammed the pointed end of the bar against the top right hinge. She struck it again and again, the clang of metal on metal echoing in the small space. On the fifth strike, the rusted hinge gave way with a screech of tortured metal. With trembling hands, they pried the lid open. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth to protect them from the damp, was a collection of papers. Elara lifted them out, her hands shaking as she unwrapped the bundle by the lantern light. The first document she saw made her gasp. It was the original territorial deed to the Stone family ranch, signed and stamped by the Surveyor General, dated 50 years prior. Beneath it was the deed to her own family's land, the Miller homestead. "Jedediah, look," she breathed, handing him the papers. "This is it. The real deeds. Whatever Blackwood has are forgeries." But there was more. Tucked at the bottom of the box was a sealed envelope with a single word written on the front. Blackwood. Elara carefully broke the wax seal. Inside was a letter, the handwriting a frantic scrawl. She began to read it aloud, her voice trembling. "To whom it may concern. My name is Jacob Vance. I was a partner to Marcus Blackwood in a land acquisition venture. I can no longer live with what we have done. Blackwood uses threats, arson, and forged documents to acquire land. He forced me to create false titles and deeds. He is responsible for the fire at the Miller farm, an act meant to intimidate Thomas Miller, who had discovered our scheme. Blackwood has blood on his hands, and I fear he will silence me as well. I have enclosed a sworn affidavit detailing his crimes, along with a ledger of his illegal transactions. I have given a copy of this confession to Thomas Miller for safekeeping, as I believe he is the only honest man who might bring Blackwood to justice. If you are reading this, it means I have failed, or I am dead. Do not let this man's evil prevail." They stared at the letter, stunned into silence. It was everything. It was more than they could have ever hoped for. It wasn't just proof of fraud. It was a confession to arson and a direct accusation of conspiracy. It was the voice of a dead man reaching across 20 years to point a finger at his killer. "We've got him," Jedediah whispered, a look of fierce, triumphant joy on his face. "We've got the son of a bitch." Their elation was cut short by a sound from above. A horse whinnying too close. Then the crunch of boots on gravel. "Looks like someone's been here," Pike, a gruff voice drawled from the darkness outside. Them doors weren't open this afternoon. Jedediah's face went grim. He extinguished the lantern in an instant, plunging the cellar into absolute blackness. Blackwood's men. They had been discovered. Panic, icy and absolute, seized Elara in the tomb-like blackness of the cellar. They were trapped mice in a stone box, and the cats were circling above. Jedediah's hand found her arm in the dark, his grip firm and steadying a silent anchor in the terrifying void. He pressed a finger to his lips, an unnecessary gesture in the pitch black, but the meaning was clear. Be still. Be silent. The faint metallic whisper of his Colt being drawn from its holster was the only sound between them, a grim promise of violence if they were found. Above them, the heavy tread of boots on the hard-packed earth sent vibrations through the ground. The slanted cellar doors creaked. "Check the cellar," came the lazy command of Pike's voice, a sound that made Elara's blood run cold. A brilliant dancing beam of lantern light sliced through the darkness, cutting a harsh yellow rectangle at the top of the stairs. Elara and Jedediah pressed themselves harder against the damp stone of the far wall, retreating into the deep shadows cast by the stone staircase. Elara held her breath until her lungs burned, certain the frantic hammering of her heart was loud enough to be heard in the next county. Tucked inside Jedediah's shirt, the papers felt as if they were glowing a beacon, calling out to their enemies. A pair of scuffed heavy boots appeared on the top step. It was Doland, the larger of the two thugs, a hulking silhouette against the lantern light. He held the lantern high, its glow illuminating the empty shelves, the thick cobwebs, the oppressive dampness. His gaze swept the small space. "Nothing down here," he called up his voice, echoing slightly in the confined space. "Just dirt and spiders. Place smells like a tomb." Elara's eyes were locked on the boots. She watched as one of them took another step down, then another. Doland was coming into the cellar. Her mind screamed. He would see the freshly pried stone, the telltale dust on the floor. It was over. You saw Pike's voice floated down, tinged with impatience. Blackwood said to watch this place close. Said Stone was getting desperate, might do something stupid like coming back here for old times' sake. Doland paused on the third step, the lantern light swinging and making the shadows writhe. He grunted, squinting into the dark corners. For a terrible heart-stopping second, his eyes seemed to pass directly over the spot where they were hiding. Elara could see the brutish set of his jaw, the vacant look in his eyes. He was a man who followed orders without thought, and that made him all the more dangerous. I'm sure he finally grumbled, seeming to decide that descending further into the grime wasn't worth the effort. If he was here, we'd have seen his horse. "Let's go. This place gives me the creeps." The boots retreated. The lantern beam swung away, and the cellar was once again plunged into absolute suffocating blackness. Elara and Jedediah remained frozen, listening to the men's voices fade into the night, followed by the muffled sound of horses' hooves clomping away. Still they waited, counting the seconds, then the minutes. Every nocturnal chirp of a cricket, every rustle of wind in the weeds above, sounded like a returning footstep. Finally, Jedediah let out a long, shuddering breath that seemed to carry all the tension with it. "That was too close," he whispered, his voice raspy. He fumbled in the dark and relit their own lantern, its warm, familiar glow a welcome comfort. In its light, Elara could see that his face was pale, his forehead beaded with sweat. He carefully checked the oilcloth bundle inside his shirt. We have to get back, now, before he sends someone smarter. The ride back to Blackwater Ridge was a frantic, paranoid flight through a landscape of shifting shadows. The moonless sky offered no comfort, only an oppressive blanket of darkness. They pushed their horses hard, the animals sensing their urgency. Every gnarled tree looked like a waiting gunman. Every distant coyote's howl sounded like a signal. At one point they heard the faint sound of riders on a parallel trail and quickly steered their horses into a deep, rocky arroyo, waiting with hearts in their throats until the sound passed. In the tense silence of the ride, Jedediah leaned over. "What you did back there, Elara. Staying calm. My Sarah." She had that same strength. "I wasn't calm," Elara whispered back, the admission tasting like ash. "I was thinking of Lily. And I was thinking that I spent the first half of my life hiding in fear of that man. I won't spend the second half doing the same." They slipped into the sleeping town, just as the first hint of grey lightened the eastern horizon. They bypassed the room above the store, their purpose now too great for caution. They marched directly to the sheriff's office, the weight of 20 years of injustice resting on the documents hidden under Jedediah's coat. Sheriff Brody was slumped asleep at his desk, a picture of weary defeat. The sharp bang of the door swinging open snapped him awake, his hand instinctively going to the pistol on his desk. "Stone, what in the hell is the meaning of this?" he demanded, blinking the sleep from his eyes. "The meaning is that your town is run by a thief and a murderer, and you and I are going to do something about it," Jedediah said, his voice ringing with a newfound, unshakable authority. He strode to the desk and unfurled the oilcloth bundle, spreading the precious documents across the wood surface. "No more warnings, Sheriff. No more helpless sighs. It's time for you to read." Brody's annoyance gave way to curiosity. He picked up the old deeds, his eyebrows raising at their authenticity. Then he picked up the letter. As he read Jacob Vance's confession, a profound transformation took place. The weary slump in his shoulders straightened. The perpetual exhaustion in his eyes was slowly burned away by a cold, rekindled fire. He traced the frantic signature with his finger, the weight of his own years of inaction pressing down on him. This wasn't just paper. It was proof. It was the absolution he hadn't known he was seeking. He looked up first at Jedediah's hard, determined face, then at Elara, who stood tall and resolute in the lamplight. She had removed her veil, her miller eyes meeting his without a hint of fear. "My name is Elara Miller," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Thomas and Mary Miller were my parents. The fire at my home was not an accident, and Marcus Blackwood is the man who lit the match." Sheriff Brody stared at her, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in his breast pocket. He stood, and for the first time he seemed to grow into the authority of the star pinned to his chest. He strapped on his gun belt, the familiar clicks of the buckle sounding like a declaration of war. "Mr. Henderson at the general store, he was a ranger with me back in the day," Brody said, his voice now crisp and decisive. "Doc Adams served as a field surgeon in the war. Go get them. Tell them their sheriff needs them and I'm deputizing them on the spot." He looked directly at Jedediah. "You too, Stone. It's time the law came back to Blackwater Ridge." An hour later, as the town came to life, 4 men walked with purpose down the main street. Sheriff Brody led the way with Jedediah, a grim-faced Doc Adams, and a nervous but resolute Mr. Henderson flanking him. They stopped in front of the Blackwood Bank and Trust just as Marcus Blackwood himself stepped out, dressed in his usual immaculate suit, a folder of legal documents under his arm. Marcus Blackwood Brody's voice boomed, cutting through the morning bustle. It was a sound the town had not heard in years, the sound of genuine authority. "You are under arrest." Blackwood froze, a perfectly charming smile fixed on his face, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Sheriff Brody," he said, his tone dripping with condescending amusement. "A bit early for theatricals, isn't it? On what absurd charge? On the charges of land fraud, conspiracy, arson." Brody's voice rose, each word a hammer blow, "and for the murder of your business partner, Jacob Vance." As Brody spoke, he pulled the letter from his pocket. "We have a full confession, Marcus, in his own hand. A sworn affidavit detailing every crime, every fire, every forged deed." Blackwood's smile finally crumbled. His gaze shot past Brody to Jedediah, and then his eyes found Alara. She was standing on the boardwalk across the street, watching him. In her defiant posture and the unwavering set of her jaw, he didn't just see a woman. He saw the ghost of Thomas Miller, the man he thought he had silenced forever. The color drained from his face as the trap sprang shut around him. "This is preposterous," he blustered, his voice losing its confident timbre. "These are lies, fabrications from a desperate bankrupt rancher." But the growing crowd of townspeople wasn't looking at him with their usual deference. They were listening and they were watching. The whispers started connecting the dots of their own misfortunes, a foreclosed mortgage here, a suspicious cattle rustling there. "It's over, Marcus," Jedediah said, his voice as cold and final as a grave. Cornered and exposed, the mask of the benevolent patriarch shattered, revealing the desperate animal beneath. With a guttural snarl, Blackwood lunged not for a weapon, but for the person who embodied his ruin. He darted across the street and grabbed Alara, yanking her in front of him as a human shield. A silver derringer, small and deadly, materialized in his hand, and he pressed its cold barrel to her temple. "Everybody back!" He shrieked, his composure utterly gone. "I'll kill her, I swear to God, I'll shoot her, I'll salute her." The crowd gasped and fell back. Jedediah froze, his face a canvas of white-hot fury and abject terror. But Alara did not scream. She did not plead. In that terrifying moment, her mind was crystal clear. She felt the cold press of the gun and saw not death, but the image of Lily's face. She thought of the dark cellar of a lifetime spent looking over her shoulder. She was done running. With a surge of pure defiant rage, she drove the heel of her boot down with all her weight onto Blackwood's finely shod instep. He roared in agony, an animal sound of pure pain. His grip on her faltered for a single critical heartbeat. It was all Jedediah needed. He crossed the distance in 2 powerful strides, a vengeful force of nature, and slammed into Blackwood with the full weight of his body. The 2 men crashed to the dusty street in a tangle of limbs. The derringer spun through the air, landing harmlessly in the dirt. Before Blackwood could even think to struggle, Sheriff Brody was upon him. A knee planted firmly in his back, the satisfying final clicks of handcuffs echoing the end of an era. It was over. A moment of stunned silence, and then a single person began to clap. Then another and another, until the whole town erupted in a wave of relieved, cathartic applause. Marcus Blackwood, the king of Blackwater Ridge, was led away in irons, his reign of fear collapsing into the dust of the main street. In the aftermath, as the sun climbed higher, Doc Adams fussed over Elara, who waved him away, bruised but unbroken. Mr. Henderson, looking immensely proud, shook Jedediah's hand. The townspeople surrounded Sheriff Brody, patting his back. Their faces filled with a respect he had not known for years. Their first stop was to retrieve Lily. Clara May Henderson met them at the door, her face beaming. "We heard the commotion," she said, handing the sleeping baby to Elara. "The whole town is buzzing. You too. You gave us our town back." Later that evening on the porch of the Stone Ranch, the world was quiet. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple. The creek murmured peacefully in the distance. Jedediah stood beside Elara, who sat in a rocking chair, gently swaying with Lily in her arms. "Sarah would have loved to see this," Jedediah said softly, looking out over the valley. To know her daughter was safe. To know her family finally got justice. "And Daniel would have been proud," Elara replied, her voice thick with emotion. "He wanted me to find peace here. I just never knew it would look like this." The past was a landscape of ghosts and ashes, but here on this porch was the future. It was uncertain and marked by loss, but it was theirs. A rancher who had lost his wife, a widow, who had lost her son, and an infant who had lost her mother. 3 broken pieces that, against all odds, had come together to form something new, something whole. They were a family forged in a storm and ready to build a life on the land that was finally and forever their own. And so out of the dust and desperation of the Wild West, a family was reborn. The story of Elara and Jedediah is a powerful reminder that the past is never truly buried, and that the deepest wounds can sometimes lead to the strongest bonds. It shows us that courage isn't about the absence of fear, but about taking action in spite of it, and that sometimes the greatest act of defiance is simply to choose hope over despair. If this story of resilience, justice, and the incredible power of family moved you, please take a moment to give this video a like. Your support helps these stories reach more people. Share it with someone you think would appreciate a tale of a past unearthed and a future reclaimed. And most importantly, if you want to hear more true-life dramas and hidden histories just like this one, make sure to subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. Thank you for listening.